In the early 1400s, Amsterdam was a wooden city. It was a dense, tightly packed ocean of thatched roofs and timber structures. That density made the city incredibly fragile. In the dry summer of 1421, a fire broke out near a blacksmith and rapidly swallowed the jam-packed timber town. This exposed a massive geographical problem. These wealthy merchant hubs were isolated from their central rulers. If a city caught fire or faced a sudden attack, the royal army was weeks away. To survive, they relied on a strict civic mandate. Every property-owning citizen was required to take up arms. They formed their own fire watches and wall patrols to keep the peace. What started as desperate night watchmen quickly evolved. These men trained together, bought expensive gear, and formed fiercely proud political fraternities, answering exclusively to their trade guilds. To protect their property from burning, these merchants inadvertently built highly effective, localized private armies. Those armed pockets set a dangerous trap for any monarch looking to assert absolute control over the region. Enter Duke Philip the Good. In the mid-15th century, Philip tried to fuse a chaotic patchwork of independent territories into a single, modern state. He aggressively standardized his domain. He established a great council to override local courts and forced the adoption of a common currency to streamline trade. But pulling a state together costs a fortune. By 1444 then, Philip needed cash, so he forced a universal tax on salt upon his wealthiest, most stubborn province, Flanders. The armed guilds of Ghent, Flanders' largest city, immediately refused. They called a strike, raised their militia banners, deployed their civic guards, and completely rejected the Duke's authority. This disagreement over salt rapidly became a war for survival. Philip knew his centralized state could not exist as long as these independent, heavily armed civic guards held military power. Ghent responded with terrifying scale. The citizen militias literally dragged massive 16-ton artillery pieces out to the siege lines to fight their own duke. Urban watchmen found themselves locked in ear-shattering artillery duels against professional Burgundian knights right outside the city walls. The climax arrived in 1453 at the Battle of Gaveren. A freak spark ignited a massive gunpowder reserve in the rebel lines. The explosion caused widespread panic, and the Duke's forces slaughtered the fleeing militiamen by the thousands. Philip crushed the rebellion. He stripped the guilds of their judicial power and forced the surviving aldermen to surrender their militia banners in public, barefoot and kneeling. The armed citizens of Ghent gambled on physical, violent rebellion against the heavy machinery of a centralized state, and they failed catastrophically. By the 1600s, the physical threat of fire and feudal lords hadn't vanished, but the nature of the men holding the weapons had shifted. Amsterdam was now the center of a global trade empire. Its civic guards were no longer just blacksmiths, they were the wealthiest merchants on the planet. However, a newly established central government in The Hague was actively trying to dictate policy and diplomacy to these wealthy merchants. The tension peaked in 1638. The Hague issued strict orders prohibiting Amsterdam from hosting or financing a visit from the exiled French queen, Marie de Medici. Amsterdam blatantly ignored the order. The city mobilized its fully armed civic guards and threw a euphoric, incredibly expensive public pageant to welcome the queen through their gates. By ignoring the central government to throw a party, the guilds demonstrated that the power dynamic had inverted. These weren't mud-soaked rebels hiding behind city walls anymore. They were political brokers using their own private armies to publicly humiliate the state. To celebrate their newfound position as the city's true power brokers, these modern civic guards commissioned massive, wall-to-wall group portraits to decorate their grand new headquarters. Look at this painting, the ultimate expression of artistic flexing, completed in 1642 by Rembrandt. Unlike stiff, static rows in traditional portraits, Rembrandt shatters the rules. He paints the militia in chaotic motion, actively loading muskets and marching forward in complete military readiness. This image projects a specific type of strength. It shows a group perfectly capable of defending its own interests without help from a king. Rembrandt created a document of a permanent shift in power. While these men appear to be in costume, they are signaling that the independent merchant class now set the rules for the gold.